This is the continuation of the Neurons, the nervous system and endocrine system lecture that was begun on Thursday, October 1st, and is going to be concluded on Monday, October 5th. So when we left off, we were talking about how neurotransmitters cross the synapse. These are chemical compounds. They cross the synapse and they look to bind themselves in the receptor sites of the receiving neuron, the dendrite of the receiving neuron. The extra neurotransmitters are reabsorbed back into the original sending cell in a process called reuptake, and that's where we left off. There are a few types of neurotransmitters that we need to know about. The most common neurotransmitter in your body is something called acetylcholine, also sometimes referred to as ACH. And ACH controls your muscles, which is why it's really common, because obviously we're going to need a lot of it to make our muscles work constantly. It also is influential in learning and memory. If you don't have enough of it, it can be part of the development of Alzheimer's disease, a neurodegenerative disease. Dopamine is our pleasure neurotransmitter. It's what makes us feel really, really good. This can be pleasure, both physical and emotional ways. So like, for example, when we take a big bite of food and it makes us feel amazing, that would be dopamine, but also the warm and fuzzy feelings that we get when someone does something really nice for us. So pleasure, anticipation, also connected to movement as well. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter linked to mood, so whether you're going to be happy or whether you're going to be sad. It's also associated with sleep and hunger. Adrenaline is actually two neurotransmitters together, but we can call them adrenaline. That deals with our fight or flight response, what sends us into an alert mode when something is dangerous to us. And then finally, endorphins, and there's a number of different types of endorphins, about 5 or 6, that work to limit pain, especially when we exercise. So this is what allows us to push past our limits of our muscles. The nervous system itself can be split into a whole kind of breakdown where the nervous system as a whole can be split into 2 parts, and then one of those can be split into 2 parts, and one of those can be split into 2 parts. For your notes, if you just copy down the parts, the titles of this, not the parts that are in parentheses, that's more than enough, because the notes will cover the stuff that are in the parentheses. So we're talking about the nervous system here. The nervous system is the part of the system of the body that controls everything. It is the master system of the body. The nervous system can be split into 2 primary sections: the brain, the central nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system. Now we'll talk about the central nervous system in a little bit, but let's refer back to the peripheral nervous system. We need to have the peripheral nervous system, because without it, the brain will not be able to control things like our muscles, our lungs, our heart, other internal organs, etc. The peripheral nervous system can be split into 2 primary sections: the somatic and autonomic nervous system. The part of the peripheral system that would be considered somatic would be the part that controls voluntary actions, mainly muscle movement. The autonomic part of it is the part that controls involuntary actions. So in this case, we're talking about digestion, circulation of blood, breathing of air, things that are done automatically and necessary for the body to function. The autonomic nervous system can be split down even further into its sympathetic and parasympathetic state. And this is when the body goes into a state of calm or a state of arousal. And now when we refer to a state of arousal, we're talking about anytime your body gets worked up. This can be physical anticipation. It can be in the sense of danger. It can be when we get really emotional. But when our body gets worked up, we go into our sympathetic state. In that time, our body goes into protection mode. So blood from our sugar from our blood gets diverted more to our muscles, making us faster and stronger, just in case we're trying to run away from danger or fight something off. Our pupils will dilate more, allowing us to see better. We'll be able to hear better. Our heart will be really fast. Our lungs will take in more air, allowing us to push ourselves a little bit further. That blood sugar is not going to be diverted to the internal organs, so things like digestion and other functioning of the organs are going to shut down temporarily. Non-essential muscles, including things like the bladder, are shut down so that the essential muscles for survival can be available. But this is why if somebody gets really scared, you may have heard about them going pee in their pants. This is sometimes why it happens if they get really, really scared. But the body can't stay in that worked up state forever. So when it needs to go into a state of calm, it goes into its parasympathetic state where all the opposite things happen. The bladder contracts, digestion starts up, the heartbeat slows down, our breath rate slows down, blood sugar is diverted to our internal organs, our pupils will contract, and that will allow us to go back to a state of calm and find this state of balance. The central part of the nervous system is split into two primary parts, and this is the brain and the spinal cord. Now, we're going to spend a lot of time on the brain, so right now I'm just going to give you a little bit of an idea of something that the brain does, and that's forming what we call a neural network. A neural network is a biological explanation about how we learn through experience. Whenever we do a skill, this can be a skill of some sort of knowledge that we have. It can also be a physical skill. The neurons in our brain, the cells of the nervous system form literal links. Tissue will literally connect them together. And then when we continue to do that same activity, let's say on a different day, those neurons will find links of their own. Eventually, the neurons links will get bigger and bigger and bigger, taking in more and more cells. And the more and more cells we have devoted to a network, the better we are at something. This can be anything from playing music to doing athletic skills, to learning a language, to learning how to read. All of these are a part of these neural networks we've created in our mind. And what's even crazy is that sometimes our neural networks will link with one another. So, for example, our neural network of learning how to read may link with our neural network of learning another language because there is similarities there, but not all. So the whole networks won't link together. The spinal cord has two primary purposes. The first is to be a conduit for all the signals going to and from the body. So when the brain sends signals down to the body, or when the body sends signals back up to the brain, it has to go through the spinal cord. But the spinal cord is also important for our reflex response. If we are potentially going to do some damage to our body, a signal goes through the spinal cord first. But when the spinal cord recognizes that high intensity signal of potential pain, it can send a signal out of its own back to the muscles of whatever part of our body is facing damage, allowing us to move away and escape that damage before our brain can even register pain. The best example of this could be when someone puts their hand over a flame, and before they even have a chance to feel the flame, they jerk their hand away in a reflex response. The last thing we're going to talk about today is the endocrine system. The endocrine system is the part of the body that controls our hormonal response. So hormones are similar to neurotransmitters. These are chemical compounds that affect our behavior, our thoughts, our feelings, and so on. But hormones are spread throughout the body in a different way. They're spread chemically through the bloodstream. Hormones are released into the bloodstream by different parts of the body that we call glands. Some of these glands you probably have heard of, like your stomach. Other glands you may not have heard of. But glands are all organs of the body that secrete their hormone or release their hormone into the bloodstream, spreading it around, allowing the hormone to do its desired effect to maintain some sort of function to our body. But hormones, like neurotransmitters, can have emotional effects, behavioral effects, and so on. The master gland of the endocrine system is the pituitary gland. It is located in our brain, and it releases a number of hormones, one of which is oxytocin, which is what we call our love hormone. It's the hormone that's released when we feel special and loved in an emotional way. But the pituitary gland is also responsible for releasing hormones that send messages to the other glands to make sure they release their hormones. So the pituitary gland is in charge of it all. But the pituitary gland receives its instructions from the brain, a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which we'll talk a lot more about later when we talk about the brain. But basically, what's really interesting about hormonal responses is that it always begins and ends with the brain. Say, for example, somebody has not eaten for a long time, and so the their stomach will secrete a hormone that sends it up to the brain, uh, and the brain will then respond in turn. But the only way that that stomach got its message is from the brain itself. The hypothalamus had to signal the pituitary gland, which had to signal the stomach to release its hormone, which then sends its message up to the brain, which then tells the brain, hey, I need to go eat. Some of the glands that you need to know about outside the pituitary gland are the adrenal gland, which helps us in our fight or flight response. Adrenaline is both neurotransmitters and hormones, which is really shows the importance of keeping our body alive. The pancreas is an organ that regulates the level of sugar within our blood. So too much sugar, it's going to release a hormone. Too little sugar, it's going to release a hormone. And that will help regulate how much sugar is in the blood. Someone who may have a problem with their pancreas might have diabetes. The thyroid is an organ that affects metabolism and calcium levels. And that, of course, can cause a person to have really fast metabolism or really slow metabolism. Damage to this could cause someone to have either hyper or hypothyroidism, which can make someone either really skinny or really obese. And then finally, you have your sex glands, which are important in reproduction. The testes in men and the ovaries in women, they secrete testosterone and estrogen. Both men and women have both testosterone and estrogen. Just men have more testosterone and women have more estrogen. So finally, the very last thing is, what are the difference between hormones and neurotransmitters? If they're both these chemical compounds that affect what we do, how we think, how we feel, what's the difference? Well, there's one big one. Neurotransmitters are moved electrically through the nervous system. This means that when they take effect, it's immediate because electricity moves so quickly. And so we feel it as soon as it happens, and then as soon as it's done, it leaves our system. The feeling leaves us. Hormones, on the other hand, are secreted chemically through the bloodstream, which means that they're kind of slow to take effect. It might take us a little while before we get really worked up and really emotional from the hormonal response. And even once something is done, we still may feel that kind of burst of emotion because our hormones have caused us to feel that change. And the hormones have not left our bloodstream yet, which is why we're still feeling the emotion from it. And if you've ever gotten really mad about something and then it finished and you were still mad, that's one of the big reasons why. Anyways, I hope that this provided some clarity and some ideas about what all these things of the nervous and endocrine system are.